master's in communication, rhetoric, philosophy, and sociology. And I've been known to teach a couple acting classes here and there. And we are continuing on our journey where we are playing in the sandbox of ideas that are relevant to our culture. Today and this week, I really want to talk about what it means to be a democracy. But before we can do that, it is really helpful to understand about information and how information impacts the process of decision making. Because you can't be a democracy without good information, because democracy is a form of organized chaos in which we test ideas in a public forum. So I'm going to first talk about information, and then as we move forward this week, Tuesday through Friday, we'll talk a little bit more about democracy, representation, and how a community which has not reliable information can start debating actual ideas that are important to the process of decision making. So today, I'd like to start off, though, by talking about the spiritual law for success and spirituality. And this is the law for Tuesday. And I think it's very, very helpful for us today. And of course, this is from the Chopra book, The 7 Laws of Spiritual Success. And today's law is the law of karma. Every action generates a force of energy that returns to us like in kind. Let me just say that again, because I think it's really important to remember this. Every action generates a force of energy that returns to us like in kind. Now, on a spiritual point of view, we could say, like, if I treated somebody like a piece of crap, then I'm probably creating an environment in which somebody will treat me the same. And I know you know what this is like. You get in an argument with your significant other or best friend or even somebody online. And if you say something cruel, unthinking, that person's probably going to respond in the same way. This is why when we were talking, I think a couple weeks ago, about how to help somebody when they are not doing well, and even if it upsets you, the best thing to do is just sit and listen and ask exploratory questions. Can you clarify that for me? Can you help me understand this better? Because I'm not really grasping what you're thinking. So it's really important to remember that this law of spiritual success actually functions in all aspects of our life, every single aspect of our life. So it goes with information too, which is what we're going to talk about today. So there's 2 major events that happened in the last few days that is very significant for us all. The first one is the death of the Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And the second one is the post that was made by the CDC and then immediately removed about the fact that coronavirus is airborne. Both of these things deal with information and processes. And so I'm going to touch on these ideas before we move on to how to assess information and what has happened. What has happened to our world over the last 10 years that the news is so unreliable, that the information we find on websites are so unreliable, and how they form our opinions, and then our opinions become a little bit unreliable as well. So when we're looking at processes and information, especially when we're looking at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's important to remember that the reason it's so controversial right now about replacing her so close to an election is for a very simple reason. Democracy, again, is organized chaos. That means the opinions placed out into the public sphere through newspapers, through our discourse, through the discourse that we hear from politicians, and so on and so forth, is a crazy testing pot. It's kind of like the melting pot of the United States. We refer to the United States as a melting pot, although that's a really bad metaphor because we're not so much a melting pot as we are, well, let's just compartmentalize people as much as we possibly can. But When it comes to democracy, it needs to be a melting pot of ideas. And for that to happen, we need time. Ideas need time. And just because this nation felt one way in the last presidential election does not mean the nation feels the same way now. That's why we need this period of campaigning, this period of discourse, of debate, of discussion, in which that is the only real major thing that's happening. I know I have a lot of friends who say, why are we having all this campaigning when all this work needs to be done? But for a democracy to work and for democracy not to become like, let's say, a dictatorship in any way, shape, or form, we really need that time in our democratic processes to allow the chaos to happen, to allow the melting pot of ideas to happen before we make new major decisions. So I was reading the National Geographic, an article by Amy McKeever, and it was published on September 19th, 2020. And she observed how the Supreme Court vacancy is the second closest to an election ever. The only one that occurred closer is when Chief Justice Robert B. Tanley died 27 days before the 1864 presidential election. And then the president, who was Abraham Lincoln, he delayed his nomination of Salmon P. Chase until after he won the re-election. And he did this because he understood that democracy itself is organized chaos, that the nation's opinion of the leaders and who should be making the decisions for us are representatives, that the mood changes moment to moment, year to year. And if we don't give a good amount of time to hear the people and to understand what changes are needed, then we don't really have a good democratic process. So there's reasons for these traditions. And I really don't think it's about me winning versus you winning. I really think it's about the testing of ideas. The testing of ideas is vital to a democracy. You can't have a democracy unless people have gotten out into the public forum, including people like you and me, everyday people living our everyday lives, and engaging in that process of ideas, of debate, of concern, and yes, of chaos. But of course, humans hate chaos. We hate having things change. And honestly, I think any administration that wants to rush so quickly to make a change this late in the date, if you will, they're concerned they may not win. And I'm reminded of the last presidential election, when Obama was stepping down, and we in the country in general had an opportunity to put in a new Supreme Court justice, and we didn't do it then for this very reason. It wasn't just political, it was respect for the process, a respect for the chaos that must occur in order for peaceful exchange of power. Now, let's talk about the CDC, because this comes up too as a testing of ideas. So the CDC yesterday put out a report that the coronavirus was airborne. And a lot of newspapers had made some very important suggestions that this becomes not only a political issue, but also an economic issue. If we bow our hat and we go, yes, 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 the coronavirus is airborne and it can go through AC systems, and that virus can then be circulated around a room. That means businesses need to look at their circulation systems for air. They need to look at how they are filtering air, and this could be super expensive. Indeed, it could put small businesses out of business, because this type of work, in order to make our filtration systems work better, is going to be super expensive. So there's this very difficult balance that needs to be struck. Now, we also know, though, that, and I'm trying to find the article here on my notes, We also know that this particular idea that it is airborne is not new. Matter of fact, there was an article out in July that talked about a restaurant in China who found that the virus spread around the restaurant. And it's interesting to note that the CDC actually published this article on their website. So it's not like this is new information. Doctors have known this for a very long time now, or at least for several months, that the airborne droplets, it's not just close. It can go through our filtration systems. And I want to give, though, another note, and it's my eyeball thinking piece when I look up into the air, is that in some ways, the CDC responded that it was an accident. They didn't mean to publish that information yet, that the information itself was not ready and it's in draft proof, so that it was an accident. And we can say that that makes a lot of sense. I mean, truly, when you put out information, you're always putting out an essay. And an essay is a test of ideas. That's what an essay is. An essay is, I am testing my thesis and trying to see if it's strong, if it's really well packed, if it's nicely balanced. It is the test. Essays are tests of ideas. And as far as the CDC was concerned, at least from what we know, that test of idea was not ready. But there's lots of problems that are now arising as a result of what happened with the Supreme Court justice and the passing of Ruth Ginsburg, and also the CDC. And that all has to do with information. So let's get started. Opinions versus facts. We've been talking about this a lot over the last several years because it seems to a lot of the research that we individuals are having a hard time distinguishing opinions from facts. And indeed, I'm guilty of this. I don't know if you are, but I certainly am. I can't tell you how many articles that I just briefly looked at, just like, oh, I love this idea. And I post it on Facebook, or I post it on Twitter, or I post it wherever. And then we discover, or I discover, that it's not true, or it was an article from 1995, or that person died 7 years ago, or whatever it happens to be. And the reason we start to do this, even people who have gone to school for years and years, even your wisest aunt make these mistakes. And we make these mistakes because information is so abundant, is so quick, is so overwhelming, information overload, that we no longer take the time to really vet information. Not only us individuals on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, or whatever, but also government leaders, newspapers, people who should know better. And we have all been affected. You could call this a type of virus. We have the coronavirus, and we have the, we're all overwhelmed the virus from information. So there's different types of information that we have to keep in mind. We have empirical evidence, and this is evidence from science, right? So they do different experiments, they try to have a controlled situation, and they try to create a situation in which whatever results occur, there is very little room for error. So that's empirical evidence, right? Then we have relative information. And this is information that is usually relative to different portions of the population, or different spiritualities, different political ideals. These are relative to the cultures that we are involved in. And then there's something called doxa. Doxa is a Greek word, and it's used to explain common belief or common opinions. And usually these opinions are held common by a larger population. They are belief, they are opinions, but they're also educated beliefs and educated opinions. So that's when we have people like gatekeepers who are looking at all the information that's coming to them, and they're doing a lot of work to verify that information before it goes out to the public. And we've talked about gatekeepers before and how important they are. Gatekeepers really do take a good amount of time to vet information. But we don't have gatekeepers anymore. I mean, we do, but not as much. So what has happened is this convergence, this very interesting and maddening convergence of the internet, blogs, the everyday news person, and influencers and advertising that have all come together throughout this medium of the internet and social media and our phones. And we have created a space for absolute public nonsense. Public nonsense. And it's a problem. The problem is that we don't know what to believe anymore. So when the CDC publishes something and then takes it back and says it's an accident, especially after a lot of changing opinions, we look at somebody like the CDC and we go, oh, you guys are flip-floppers, right? And flip-flopping is not always a bad thing. It can be bad when it's politically, economically, commercially motivated, and rather than motivated by, oh, I have tested this essay, I have tested this idea, and I realize that I did not pass the test. So it becomes difficult to believe organizations anymore, such as the CDC, because there is a constant changing of information that we all know is somewhat politically, somewhat economically, somewhat commercially motivated. And that's where it becomes problematic. But in general, when we test an idea, when we test information, and we find out that we are wrong, it's important for us to own up to that. So, for example, when I was teaching early on, and the internet was just getting, really crazy with these new algorithms that basically gave us the information that we wanted to see, for example, rather than a variety of information coming into our laps. I felt that the internet was far more safe than it is. I said, oh, don't worry about it. If they have any information on you, I said that you are associated with a number. You are not associated with a person. I was wrong. And one of my students had pointed that out to me, and I had to stop and check my assumptions. Because when the internet started, for me, it was this beautiful playground of potential. It's almost the same way as how people felt when television first started. When television first started, everybody said, oh, here is the vehicle to help educate the public so that we can become an educated democracy. And the same thing happened when the internet came out. Here is a vehicle in which we can educate the entire public so the public can be an educated democracy. But when we test ideas and we find out that we are wrong about our ideas, it is important to stand up and own up to it and look at our students and go, you know what? Such and such was right. I was absolutely wrong. And this is what I discovered. Because we are always just testing ideas in a democracy. And the democracy doesn't end at voting. It's part of our everyday interactions. Our interactions with our loved ones, our interactions with our peers, our interaction with local politics, local social issues, local economic issues, and it keeps going on and on and on. But we no longer have the information we need in order to engage in this democracy the way we need to engage, because the information is unreliable. I once got a really bad review from a student who was extremely upset that I would not let them do research on the internet for their research papers. I was sending them to the library. This is just 2 years ago. And yeah, I was sending them to the library because the information my students were coming back with from the internet was incorrect. They never cracked open their book. They never looked at the actual information. And so I felt it was really needed to teach them, to show them the difference between somebody's general blog post, who they think they're an expert, versus actually an influencer who is paid to write this information so that advertising can get more dollars. And that's part of the problem we're experiencing right now. Public intellectuals, which used to be a mainstay of American social, economic, and commercial and political politics, all of that, these public intellectuals were the vetters of information. They were the experts. They've taken the time to really think through the issues. But we've replaced them with influencers. And a lot of time we think of influencers as being those people on Instagram who's saying, hey, I just got this new phone and let me tell you about it. But that's not where the influencers stop. I was once hired by a company to write a whole amount of articles, health articles, as I was an ethicist in the business of bioethics. I was looked at as an expert. So I'd write these articles, and then I realized that these articles were just being placed out in these pretend blogs, in these pretend websites, in order to get people to click on advertisements. And I had to stop. I had to stop because my material was not being used in a way, as far as I was concerned, that literally promoted diversity of opinion. And this has become a huge problem in our world. We can no longer really assess information well because we've gotten rid of all of those safeguards that helped us better assess the information. And if you're going to live in a democracy, the most important aspect of democracy is reliable information. You cannot debate ideas within a public sphere if the ideas are imaginary, made up, lies, opinions. In a sense, what we've become is Colbert's joke. Colbert, who came up with Wikileaks on the Colbert Show, and he had all these people go to Wikipedia and change the information so that he could change history, so that he could show people gut opinions are a problem. And here we are. We're living in the soup of Colbert's joke. So my challenge to you this week, as you read the news about Ginsburg, about replacing the Supreme Court justice so quickly before an election, about the CDC, about the reliability of information we are receiving from what are supposed to be spaces of authority, I want you to consider how you vet that information. How do you investigate? What is your empirical process so that you can better know whether the information you are receiving is good information? With that said, I want you all to take a seat. If you're driving, and the energy we receive back, and the information we get back. Get comfortable. You can sit in a chair, lie on the bed or the floor. We're listening again to Kevin MacLeod Garden Music. Go visit him over at Impotech. Has a lot of wonderful music for purchase as well as free. I want you to breathe. Inhale for a count of 5. Hold for a count of 1 or 2. And then exhale for a count of 6 or 7. Take a minute to scan your body. Are you holding your jaw? Maybe your brow line, shoulders. Maybe you have some discomfort in your back or your feet. Breathe into those areas and release. I hope you're still with me. Had a little bit of an internet disconnect. And we're breathing. Now, imagine all the ways information comes to you. And also imagine how you verify that information. Challenge yourself to really investigate the ideas that you are receiving, the debates and discourse that you engage in, the public intellectuals or influencers that you're listening to. Sometimes it's hard to know whether this test of ideas is created for the right reasons. How can you investigate? How can you become the gatekeeper? The gatekeeper of information for yourself and for others. Some information is frightening, such as the spread of the coronavirus through air conditioning systems and other air filtration systems, or whether we're tourniqueting democratic processes, taking away the ability of the average person to really have their voice heard and engage in the process. Sometimes we think we are taking over and making decisions for others because we say to ourselves, this is for the good of everyone. But have you talked to everyone? Have you engaged with all the people that this decision may affect? How do we negotiate our personal needs with the needs of our communities? How do we articulate and engage with that exchange of information? Today, as we think about the spiritual law of karma and what we give creates energy that comes back to us in kind, think about how you're engaging in that karmic process. It's not an easy road. It means a lot of work for each of us, including myself. But go forth today with that thought. Why are processes important? Why is information important? I thank you all for joining me today. I'm sorry for the internet drop. I hope that you have a wonderful, beautiful day, that you test out ideas, you investigate the sources, you become part of the process. Thank you for joining me. Aloha, mahalo, and of course, namaste.